Good afternoon, and welcome to today's IABC Heritage Region webinar, Communicating Across Multiple Audiences. My name is Greg McCormick, and I'm Communication Chair of the IABC Heritage Region. We've enjoyed bringing you monthly webinars focused on trends and best practices in the communication profession. This month's session focuses on lessons learned from a career spent making connections. In just a few moments, Curt Dudley, Director of Broadcast Services for Athletics at James Madison University in Harrisonburg, Virginia, will share with us how he helps bring the accomplishments of JMU athletics to multiple audiences from the school's past, present, and future simultaneously. When Curt started at JMU in 1988, social media was handled primarily by the Postal Service, and Mark Zuckerberg was a 4-year-old. Today, Curt utilizes his nearly 40 years of experience and a personal touch to supplement the work of the athletics communications staff. His personal accounts and fan pages connect more than 13,000 followers across the spectrum of social media channels. Curt's role at JMU combines multimedia communications with the traditional responsibilities of a sports information director. He develops radio programming, assists with commercial broadcasts, and ultimately employs creative ways of using new media as they evolve into multimedia. He is most easily recognized as the all-sports voice of the Dukes for online, better known as Madazone, as well as traditional linear video productions. Curt joined JMU as an assistant sports information director, serving as the primary contact for a variety of men's sports. Prior to that, he was a sports information director at Bridgewater College from 1980 to 1988, developing the foundation for what became the first full-time SID position at his alma mater. He is a member of the College Sports Information Directors of America, the Virginia Sports Information Directors, and the Collegiate Baseball Writers Association. Before we begin, we have a couple of housekeeping notes. I'd like to introduce Amy Miller, our Region Finance Chair and Tech Associate for this webinar. Amy will review a few quick points to help you gain the most from this experience. Amy?
Thank you, Greg. If you would like to watch today's webinar in full screen mode, then mouse to the top right portion of your screen and you'll see 4 small arrows. Click on that symbol to enter or exit full screen mode. During the presentation, if you'd like to send us a comment or question for discussion afterwards, please use the chat button in the toolbar at the bottom of your screen. Just mouse down to the bottom of your screen and your toolbar will appear, including the chat button. If any of you have joined with others watching in the same room using a single connection, that's great. If that's your situation, we ask that you kindly let us know how many are at your location using the chat tool, just for our records. After the presentation, Greg will moderate a brief opportunity for Curt to answer attendee questions that come in via the chat, and we may also have time for live questions. If you'd like to join the conversation later, right now we're showing some thoughts that may spur ideas for you. Also, today's webinar is being recorded. As a registered attendee, you will receive the following: a link to our very brief survey as you leave the webinar. Please take a moment to respond so we can keep making improvements. You'll also get an email with links to the recording of today's webinar, the slides, and a registration opportunity for our August webinar. And now, back to Greg.
Thank you, Amy. One more quick note. We hope this webinar whets your appetite for a visit to Detroit this fall, when our regional conference takes place in the Motor City, September 22nd through 24th. You can register now at iabcheritageconference.com. Now, let's get started. Curt, take it away.
Thank you very much, Greg and Amy, and thanks to IABC Heritage for allowing me to present my case study of communication throughout my career. Delighted to be here with you here on this Wednesday afternoon. I guess it's Webinar Wednesday, and I'm coming to you, welcoming you from my office at James Madison University. You can see a couple of posters there behind me, some of the other little things. There's lots of trinkets throughout here. Throughout my sports career that are part of this office as well. But today, of course, we're here to talk about communications. But since many of you, we're talking about, of course, many audiences and diverse audiences, and because of that, Well, I probably should share with you quite a bit about James Madison University and really a little bit about that program and just, well, how it is done throughout the years and how its sport has also carried out throughout the course of its history. So just one moment here. Let me rearrange something and we should be good to go. Beg your pardon for just a moment. And I'm so sorry. I'm having a technical difficulty here.
Curt, it should take you 2 clicks to share your screen.
It's not sharing for me, unfortunately. All right, let's go with this. And there we go. You already seeing it now? Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Well, let me tell you a little bit about James Madison University. Again, I do apologize there for that technical difficulty. A school that was founded in 1908 as a teacher's college, a normal school at that time. And then in 1938, it became Madison College and remained thus until 1977, then named James Madison University. Now, enrollment currently is about, 22,000. About 2,000 of those are graduate students, and the campus, as you can see there, sprawls throughout Harrisonburg. It's about 800 acres now, and it's split right down the middle by Interstate 81, the original campus on the west side of 81. Of course, it was here before 81 was built, and then the East Campus has come up throughout the years as well. James Madison is a charter member of the Colonial Athletic Association, which is a Division I member of the NCAA, which that footprint for the Colonial ranges all the way from Charleston, South Carolina to Orono, Maine, with most schools right there on the Atlantic seaboard. JMU is the westernmost school within the Colonial Athletic Association. Again, it is Division I. Now, James Madison supports 18 varsity sports programs and a few highlights throughout the last several years. Last year, the Dukes won the national championship in women's lacrosse, beating Boston College in a very exciting game up in Long Island. And then we have 2 national championships at the football championship subdivision. And just for those of you who are not very familiar with that, it's a Division I division that offers 63 scholarship versus the FBS, the Football Bowl subdivision, which offers 85 scholarships. That's really the biggest difference. It's not so much school size as the number of scholarships that you offer and what you want to do with your budget, quite frankly, as well. So the Dukes in 04 beat Montana, in 16 knocked off Youngstown State, and runner-up to North Dakota State in 2017. The Dukes' first national championship in the NCAA came in 1994. The field hockey national champs, they beat North Carolina in overtime. The head coach, Christy Morgan, she's the one on the crouching down on the far right side. Actually, she went to Old Dominion, was an Olympian, and is our coach currently for the field hockey Dukes. One of the programs that has really been on the rise of late is the softball Dukes. They won regional titles in 16. In 2019, this year, beating Michigan, a doubleheader on a Monday, and then flew out to face UCLA. Did lose to the Bruins, but the Bruins went on to win a national championship. But you can see that record, the last 7 seasons, 331 wins and 80 losses. So just a little over 10 losses a year and about 50 wins a year. So they've been an exciting program to watch. And last year was a banner year for the men's soccer program, which made it all the way to the quarterfinals of the NCAA National Championship. Now, the last several years, JMU has been the winningest program in the state of Virginia, winning what we call the Virginia Sports Information Director's State Survey for having the best winning percentage among all schools. Now, they didn't win it this year, but if you look the last 4 years, they've had a winning rate of about 67%, and that is an extremely high winning rate for programs, considering all of those across the board. So many championships there. But I wanted to give you a little bit of a feel for what James Madison is all about. I was with an alum from Florida yesterday, giving her a tour of some of our athletic facilities, and she was quite amazed at what she did not know about JMU. So glad to share that with you. All right, we're here today to talk about communications. Communications sounds like an action word. It certainly is a process involved with that. But to me, and what I'm going to share with you a lot of my philosophies that have been developed throughout the years, and maybe you'll pick up a thing or two that maybe you haven't considered as far as being a professional communicator. Now, of course, my topic is sports, but what I'm going to talk about can, in many regards, pertain to any subject matter. It just depends on how you want to approach it. Now, a good communication requires many subtleties, a lot of subtleties, in fact, many things we take for granted, a lot of details that we may take for granted as well. And ironically, to me, communications starts by stopping. That's right, by stopping. And you're thinking, well, what does that mean? Actually, it's generated from nothing. Now, how can nothing generate something? Well, I want to give you a little bit of a first message here to kind of, well, illustrate this. I want to have you read this. You see it? Yeah. Can you read it? You make anything out of it? Well, that's the first message I'm sending you today, and it was quite noisy, wasn't it? It was quite jumbled. You really couldn't see the details. There was no differentiation. There was nothing stopping and starting. What was the message saying? So to me, in many regards, it is the nothing that makes all the difference in the world, because what that message was this. Hello from JMU, the same thing. The difference was I wrote all those letters on top of each other. There was no differentiation. There was no stopping and starting. You know, my background is actually, my degree is in business administration, but I'm also very, undergraduate educated in biology and some of the sciences. That's really what my first academic love was. And so when you think about the researchers and what they do with trying to fight cancer and genetic research and everything, they're looking for those little subtle differences that means the difference between a cell being a healthy cell and a not so healthy cell. And our communications are much like that in terms of the overall analogies there. The space between each letter, between each word, to me is the most powerful thing about it. If you didn't have that space, then the communication was not there. You take away all the clutter, you take away all of the noise. Now, it seems very simple. It is very simple, but is it something that you've ever considered? Is it something you simply took for granted? You know, when we learned how to write, they didn't tell us that why it was important that there was no space there. And that space is represented in our symbolism by a zero or O, or just the thought of it being nothing. So from nothing generates something when you do have that change, that differentiation. It provides you an origin, interesting origin, one of those O words, okay? Where are you starting from? What is the origin? How are you oriented? Oh, another O word that's out there, okay? O, we say O and our lips make that O circle. It's very important in our whole lexicon, in our whole vocabulary, in our whole sound, in our whole speech. Those are very important words, and to me, they're starting points. If I do this and I put you in a dark room, although you're seeing actually my thumb there, but imagine yourself in a dark room and I spin you around, no light coming in anywhere, and I tell you to head north. Well, you're disoriented. You have no idea where you are. You need that orientation. You need to have that beginning as to where you're going to go. And a good communicator knows that you need to start with that orientation. So I'm kind of orienting you right now with where I'm going to be going and carrying you along for this webinar trip here today. Another very important O word to me in the origin and the orientation of things also deals with stopping and observing. That's one of the very key points I make to students that I work with in the broadcasting class that I teach here at JMU is, and again, I said at the start, communication sounds like an action word, but it really begins by stopping. Well, broadcasting is also an action word, but it begins with observation. And that is, that's kind of an internal communication. You're listening to what your own thoughts are. You're putting them in order. Then, as I am right now, you start to share them with the outside publics. And right now, you're my diverse audience across the grade. I have no idea the age range of those watching today or your business background or what you're doing, but it is, I'm sure, very diverse for those of you who are watching here today. Now, my career, I will share with you, has evolved within the organizations that I have worked for. And there's only been two: Bridgewater College, my alma mater. And quite frankly, my job there, when Greg was talking about 80 to 88, that included actually 79 to 88. That included my undergraduate years. And in my senior year, I wrote a paper about the recruiting and marketing of Division III college athletics. And at that time, the demographics in Virginia were showing that the college-age students was going to be on the decline. It was a small school, and if enrollment decreased, it was a big financial impact. Well, the president at Bridgewater College at the time, Dr. Wayne Geiser, was an economist, and he understood that certainly, but he really wasn't into sports all that much. But I walked in with the director of admissions, and we convinced him that if he were to use sports as a method of which at least getting the attention of potential student athletes and students in general, it may help. So he hired me. First paper ended up being my first job description. That was pretty cool, I think. So I stayed there until 88 and offered them something to their market that they didn't have before, and that was a sports information director and an athletic recruiter. So another message that I give many of my students early on is sort of, well, you'll hear it when you go back and listen to JFK speeches. Ask not what your country can do for you, but what you can do for your country. Well, just simply change that around a little bit. Ask not what the market can do for you, which I think many want to just do that right away, but what can you do for the market? What is it that makes you a sellable commodity, that makes you good human resources for whatever organization you work with? So when we spoke with Dr. Geiser at Bridgewater College, that was my initial, what can I do for you and what can I do for your market? Was there selfish reasons for that? Certainly. I wanted a job. I wanted to work there. And that's what happened. Eventually, I came to James Madison University in 1988, the baseball program. I was very attracted to that. It was 5 years removed from the College World Series, and served as a sports information director. And then and came with me some of my communication tools, particularly radio, and brought that here to JMU. And having that skill set allowed me to dabble in other things while I did my primary job, my primary responsibilities for a number of sports here at James Madison. In the late 1990s, went on the radio network with regularity by color commentating football and men's basketball, both home and away. And also at that time, you may recall that it was early 2000 that audio streaming came about on the internet. And so we did a little experimenting. I was the baseball SID still at that time, sports information director. So when we went on the road, we hooked things up. We dialed in and listened to that awful sound that said you were connected. And then, which had a lot of static, it sounded, of course, and then learned how to do the audio streaming for baseball. In 2007, I started to switch my roles here. And when video streaming became a product that we could utilize, a new technology, well, then I moved into the role currently that I'm in as broadcast director of broadcast services for our program, working with our radio network and the Madazone product. And as Greg said, Madazone is the online video production of many of our sports, all football games that are at home, all men's and women's basketball games, and a good percentage of those of the other 18 sports that we do sponsor here at JMU. So that gives you a little bit of background, a little bit of orientation about where I'm going with this today. Now, my audiences are multiple, they're diverse. I've talked about James Madison University, so right away, the existing market is, like Greg, the alumni. Okay, so you've got the alumni here, and you have the current students. And of course, the way the current students involve themselves in media is quite different the way than many of the alumni. The majority of the alumni at JMU were involved in media, at least when they were here. Faculty and staff and the local community, parents, fans, and the general public. And of course, within the general public, you've got basically everybody else. And what we try to do, my objective with all of that, is to connect that general public portion of the audience to become those other target audiences that I just mentioned, be they alumni, current students, or just fans in general. So you can imagine, well imagine, that those audiences are all very diverse. They come from many, many areas. They come from many, many backgrounds. And they have their reasons for why they want to be engaged or involved or follow JMU athletics. And as I mentioned, when you win 67% of your games, it makes it a little easier because there is, they're winners. Everybody likes a winner, and that makes it a little easier, certainly, to follow. Pardon me, that was an IT department trying to tell me something. They're communicating with me right now. But I want all of those audiences to become a part of the smaller target markets as we go through. And keep the internal, well, basically many of those audiences, they're external and they become internal, and we still want to maintain an engagement with those internal audiences. The principles, some of the basic principles for me are product is the information. Our product is sports information about the 18 athletic programs here at JMU. I'm doing a service to the JMU student athletes to make their experience here as good as it possibly can. We've got all kinds of support groups and everything from athletics training to the leadership program. Athletics communications is deemed a part of that. And when we can tell the stories of those individuals, then we are making their experience even much greater than if we're not out there telling their stories. It's an emotional attachment when you look at it from that perspective. We want to recognize their accomplishments, certainly. Now, there are also defeats. We don't ignore the defeats, but certainly there's a different spin on that as well. And you can get into some arguments and maybe have another webinar on maybe coverage of sports and how it is consumed these days. And let's save that maybe for another time. But we want to tell the stories and tell those stories to others, because it's not only what they do on the field, but what they do off the field, the human interest aspects. Historically, when people would come to me and ask me in, say, 1999, what my favorite sport was at JMU, I would quite frankly say baseball, because that's what I was known for professionally and working in the baseball sports information industry, that segment of it. But as I started to work more in the other sports and broadcasting football and basketball and ultimately volleyball and field hockey and lacrosse and the soccers, I realized it wasn't the sport themselves. Each of those have their nice characteristics and some challenges, which are always rewarding when you meet those challenges. Those things were certainly part of it, but the one common denominator in all of that was the people. And I think many of you that are probably in the communications field know that the people are who you're working with. You're serving them. You're serving that public, be it whether they're colleagues, whether they're peers, or whether they are the general public or your clients. They are all people, and that's a human aspect that we all deal with. And we've always been storytellers ever since we sat around the fire many generations ago and started this whole process of communication. The one thing, another concept, a principle of mine is make it easy. Make it easy. And I'll share that several times throughout the remainder of the presentation here. Just remember, we do want to make it easy. We want to drop it in their lap. One thing that I like to stress as we move along with diverse audiences, with multiple audiences, is we tend to get caught up in the future. We get caught up in new gadgets and new information technologies. They're great benefits. There are a lot of benefits to it. I'm sure there's a lot of arguments about things that aren't so beneficial to it. One thing I don't want us to forget for a while, and we may never forget about it, is the traditional media resources. Those resources that were available before we had the internet. And what I'm talking about, print media, of course, the good old-fashioned newspaper. I was a newspaper boy as well, would get up, crack of dawn, I still do, and deliver the paper. Now, I wasn't a full-time guy. I was part-time as far as that was concerned. But I used the old paper boy, the consistency of putting it on the doorstep every day and making sure that it was there for you. That was part of that make it easy process. So that's the print media, of course. And whether you're talking about books, magazines, newsletters, or the newspaper itself, well, that's what I'm speaking of. Now, current generations, they don't go into that quite as much as they do. We know that. That's something quantifiable. But don't forget about that market, because think about the baby boomers. There's a lot of them out there, and many of them still get their information by traditional methods, the radio, the TV, and the print media. So certainly do not forget about those. It's still works. And when I was speaking a moment ago about the external groups and the internal groups, one way that you expand your external groups is by utilizing those external media sources. Many times the social media has a direct target market that already exists, but how do you make that market bigger? By using external media sources to throw a wider net, and hopefully you get them to come into your fold. And of course, you have to have intriguing information out there and quality information as well. But again, make it easy for those folks as well. Don't make them dig for your information. Give them very succinct, very concise news releases or press releases so that they know what your subject matter is. You don't want it to be of great length. If you have a press conference, then they can answer and give questions, and you can have your Q&As. But we know that people want to read things very short and concise. And I think one thing that the internet has shown us is a lot of folks are very wordy with what they write, and we get lost it gets lost in translation. It's sort of like looking at this dot again, okay? Take as much of that mess out as you can. Make it as short as you possibly can while also getting out the information. I still use the old inverted pyramid in trying to tell stories oftentimes too. I think there's a common trend to go linear with the information. But when you get up and somebody says, or later today they say, hey, how was your day? You're probably not going to start with, I got up, I brushed my teeth, I had a cup of coffee. You're not going to start linear at the start of the day chronologically. You're probably going to start with what your highlight was. I watched a webinar today, and this dude, Curt Dudley, was telling me I should feature my highlights when I talk to you today. So, consider that. The inverted pyramid still works as well in your communications. Now, what has been a game changer, if you think about my industry, sports information, until the internet and until we had these other methods of communication, we were delivering that information at a much slower rate, but we were using the external media, TV, print, radio, and we were at their mercy. They had to make their own business decision. They had to worry about their competition. We still have competition today. I'll talk about that a little bit more here in a moment or two. But we had to rely on what they had space-wise, be it the newspaper, column inches, how much did they have? TV, how long does a sportscast last? Can they get in all the information we want? Radio, are they giving us just a soundbite, or are they giving us the chance to actually talk for a few moments? Well, that still, is part of the process. One of the delights with new media, social media, is that now those in my industry and probably in many of your industries and businesses have the ability to deliver what information you want to the general public. But beware, because are you actually delivering it to them, or are you just sending it as a message in a bottle? Anybody know what that is? Yeah, remember, you're stranded on a desert island. You have one piece of paper. You've maybe got something that you can write a message on. Hey, I'm stranded out here. Maybe you got GPS that you can tell them where you are. And you throw it in a bottle, and you hope that somebody comes across it and finds you. A lot of our messages are going out with that same hope. You need a strategy. You need to have a plan, because if you're just hoping, if you've ever seen, what's the movie about the explosion out there, Deepwater Horizon, hope's not always a great plan. You have to plan and know where you want to end up. Otherwise, you're not sure if you're going to get there. Hope is a good thing, don't get me wrong, but don't make it part of your strategy. As one of the actors in that said, hoping that you don't run out of gas before you land is not a good plan, because if you're up in the air for 90% of the time, we know that landing is the most difficult part, but if you're not prepared, it doesn't matter what happened to that other 90%. So just keep that in mind as well. But social media became a game changer for us in this industry, because now we could reach those. Let me give you a quick example for, going back to those traditional media outlets, and when they made their business decision of what they were going to publish, they did so certainly with a quantifiable reason, a quality reason as well. Not everybody outside of that understood it or currently understands it, but we in the industry did. So maybe a tennis player who did very well, all he got was the fact that he beat such and such 6-3, 6-3. That may be all there is to it. Well, now, and mom and dad may never see it. The general public may very maybe look at it if you were an agate reader, or you went through page 4 of the sports page and looked at all the fine print and the small copy. But now we can send it out, and mom and dad sees it, and their grandparents see it, and friends see it, and we can personalize it because we have that ability. And that's one of the neat things in my role as broadcast broadcast services director is not only will I do live productions, but use these things such as Instagram and Twitter and Facebook to publicize and to get out that information on all of our 450 student athletes. Now, we have sports information directors that are responsible for their individual teams, and I supplement what they do with this personal touch in following it as well. It's all part of the JMU brand, which is, I'm pretty proud to be a part of that brand from a personal standpoint. So and there's longevity certainly involved with doing that as well. And that may not be as common today as maybe it was many years ago. Yep, I know I'm a dinosaur when it comes to that, but I'm okay with that. Now, I mentioned the social media, and Madison certainly was a big factor as well. Again, going back to 1999, when a student walked in my office because he or she observed what I was doing, observation, there's that O word again, and enjoyed or had a feeling that they wanted to be in this industry, I told them at that time, well, now we have the internet, there's a few more job openings because now we have a way that we can not only take that information, but we can distribute that information, and more information is needed. It's an economics, it's supply and demand when it comes to it. And now, was the demand for some of that information great? No, but there was maybe a smaller market that wanted that tennis or wrestling or gymnastics information as it was at that time. So there were those opportunities. Also at that time, I said, but keep an eye out. In 2001, 2002, that probably in 8 to 10 years, you're going to see a lot of these big schools around the country develop their own internal broadcasting programs and broadcast whatever they want. That's what we do here at James Madison now with Madison. And as I went back and said how I kind of evolved with and gave to the market what it needed, that's what I've done with my career too. So after 18 years as a sports information director, switching over to being the director of broadcast services, incorporated really that online content, that online presence that we have at JMU. So it's really neat to provide that. And now many of those Madison productions are also piggybacked by linear TV. So we'll do a football game or softball or lacrosse that also will air on some NBC sports affiliates, or Masson, which is a network up in the Washington, D.C. area, which has a lot of our alumni. Some of you may be alums that are looking at this now. And so it's been nice, and our athletics director, Jeff Bourne, certainly wants that exposure in linear TV because, hey, that's an old-fashioned method that still gets it out there, and maybe we've pulled in some more to our internal market because we've used that external source. Now, another concept, well, let me get to that. Well, before I get to that, let me go back to the competition deal. I was talking about the competition for space and time with those traditional media. Well, now you've got an overwhelming amount of information out there. So the competition is, where do you sift through everything to find what you're looking for? Take a dark night, no moon, no clouds whatsoever. Beautiful night where you can see the Milky Way. Lots and lots of stars. I just spent some time at Smith Mountain Lake, which is a great area down in southern and southwestern Virginia near Roanoke, Blacksburg area. Beautiful man-made lake in the 1960s. The moon was out, so I didn't see as many stars, but that certainly is a great place to do this. But what star do you focus on? Can you find the star that you want? Can you find Jupiter? You can pull out a little app now and find it, certainly, if that's your thing. But my whole point is that there are billions and billions out there, to borrow Carl Sagan's old world, billions and billions, well, billions and billions of messages out there too. So how do you differentiate yourself? Where is that stopping before they find you and you start your message? So, and how do you do that? I was looking at a Twitter account the other day trying to find the score of a baseball game. And this Twitter account gave play-by-play. But at the very end, it said final score 6-2. I had no idea who won. I had to backtrack previous things. So even if you're making short messages, remember, if you get in your car and you join a broadcast in progress and it's a radio broadcast, you should hear the score every couple of minutes. And the broadcasters should be attuned to that because they don't know when you have tuned in. Well, the same with a Twitter account, particularly if you're following some live action. Make sure that you are providing more than just that play-by-play detail. And that's specific, of course, to sports, but it may be important in what you're doing too. And there's a lot of inexperience out there. We know that. And you see that in a lot of these summer leagues. I was looking for a summer league score, but that's something that they will learn, hopefully, eventually, if they get some good leadership and mentorship throughout the process. Information economics, that's interesting too. It's really hard to quantify what your information does. Like I said, my product is information. We can, as you can too, if you're using websites or you've got the analytics that you can check on clicks and read-throughs and sticking rates and all those good things. Certainly you can do that. But you have to use anecdotal situations too. And again, going back to it, being extremely observant. One of our biggest compliments when we do a Madison production is when we hear from the opponents. When another school is complimentary of the product that we put out there. And sometimes we will get that. And to me, that is one of the biggest compliments because we don't want to necessarily be homers because we've got advertisers and advertisers, Pepsi, which is one of our sponsors, they don't care if they're a fan of the Dukes, which is James Madison's mascot nickname, by the way, or if they're a fan of the Tigers. And there's bazillion Tigers out there, believe me. So we try to hold that audience as long as we can so that Pepsi's commercials are seen. They want that exposure. So it's very important to do it from that standpoint. So that's just, that's one small anecdotal account. But we can look at certainly many of those analysis methods and software and look and see just what is happening out there as we do post this. Another economical thing, and I wish I had a slide for this, but I don't have it prepared. I use this for the students, is a bow tie. Think of a bow tie. And if you spend a lot of time on one open end, you can maybe even use an hourglass to look at this as well. I've got an hourglass sitting up here too, a timepiece. And on the open side, you spend all of your time gathering all this information together and you get it organized and you get it to where it makes rational sense. And then that narrow area of the bow tie where the tie is actually knotted up or the sand is sifting through an hourglass, that's the time that you have to distribute it. And then on the opposite side, what does it do when it gets that other way? It becomes exponentially powerful at that stage because then you are having an impact on the personnel or the consumers and to what they are actually seeing. The important thing there, of course, as you're doing that and you're delivering it, make sure that you have quality material. You sift through all the quantity, but make sure that it is quality. If it's just simply throwing it out there, I think you're wasting more of your time than you are. Now, there are some theories of just casting that wide net and hoping that it works a little bit. But again, is it a message in a bottle, or do you have a specific, using an old term, rifle approach to it sometimes? The personal touch, longevity, certainly for my career, has a lot to do with it. One of the neat things is I can connect that pre-generation of internet student athletes and students like Greg at James Madison University. One way he keeps up with what's happening here, and it's an emotional connection now for him and a lot of alumni, is by becoming a Facebook connection with friends that he had here at JMU and yours truly, because I use Facebook as that means to connect with that audience with that emotional attachment, bringing them back to James Madison University through social methods, social media methods. So there is kind of the looking at the past, that pre-internet generation. How can you hook them back in? Is there something that's applicable to your business? Think about that a little bit. Can you reach back to that baby boomer generation? Not that Greg was right there, but I'm on the edge of it. I know he's just on the outside looking in from there. And then let's see here, current student athletes. We're engaging with them right now. That's most of our communication with them and displaying and telling their stories is through the modern communication methods. But again, we're not forgetting the old methods as well. And then one of my practices is as we sign future student athletes and future Dukes, getting in touch with them as soon as I possibly can, developing that rapport with them early, getting to know their story, because even though they may still be seniors in high school or yet to come here and matriculate to James Madison, in a couple of years, I might have a big feature story that I want to tell about them. So again, that longevity, that building process, that storytelling process, and that research and development, that discovery method. You do have that discovery time on all those too. And you have to stop to discover and to think about and to make those observations before you push them out there. Don't go so fast that you jump through all of that and you miss a lot of the opportunities. That's one thing that burns me up when I miss an opportunity. And that happens a lot because there are a lot of opportunities that just go by the wayside. Another story I'll tell you is, which is kind of one of the methods that's developed throughout the years. And Greg mentioned, I think he did in the introduction, that I have a group of 13,000 followers through my social media accounts. That's LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. And that's developed over the years. I started Facebook in 2007 and jumped on Instagram, Twitter, and then Instagram and LinkedIn as time has gone on. And it was a marketing director came in 2007 and said, Curt, you need to be on Facebook because of all the connections that you have. And so I did. And so the personal touch, certainly has become a part of that as well. And what I'm doing to make it easy for that group, not all those so much on LinkedIn. I keep that from more of a business standpoint instead of working with the marketing, but I deliver information and drop it into their social media. Certainly they can go to jmusports.com, which is the website for JMU Athletics, but they're more likely to go to their own accounts every day than they are to a website. So what I would do, and I found many years ago, and I'll quicken this up here, is that organizations people don't necessarily like to learn from outside media about what's happening inside their organization. So here at JMU, when we had a coaching change, and before we had even email, they might learn of a coaching change or personnel change through outside media, which if we can tell them first internally, that's good internal PR. Okay, we're sharing with the inside guys before the outside guys learns about it. So we continue to do that now. Well, one coach came up and said, can you keep me up to date on everything else that's going on JMU by sending that out on a daily basis? So not only does my inside tracks go out to everybody on staff at JMU every day during the school year, during the summertime, I take a little bit of a reprieve from that. But every day they're getting dumped right into their lap, right into their email at 7 o'clock in the morning. Last night's scores, today's schedule, and some headlines and highlights from what happened over the last 24 hours. Some of it is game stories, some of it is news, awards, whatever. All that does come into play. That is expanded to not only the staff, but also to a group of our donors. That is the Duke Club, is our donation or fundraising arm of JMU Athletics, and there's a special group of letter winners, former student athlete. They receive that through email every morning, and that's a personal touch. I hear back from them quite often. And that same information is repurposed on Facebook, throughout Twitter, presented in a little different way, but it's there, and it's also used throughout local media as well. Dropping it in their lap, making it easy for them, because you never know what kind of deadline they're under. And if they can pick up a 30-second story real quick, then you're helping them out and you're getting that exposure out there. So that's all inside tracks is what I call it, and I share it with many people. And it's about, right now, probably about 11,000, and most of those get that information before 7:30 every day, Monday through Saturday, and maybe by 9 on Sunday. So, but that gives you a little bit of a look and a scope of where I was going to come from for today. And I want to thank everybody for tuning in here this afternoon. Do appreciate you logging on. And again, thanks to IABC and Heritage for the Heritage Region for inviting me here, Greg. And I hope that everybody got at least a little nugget out of this, no matter how small, with ideas and experiences that I have shared with you today. Once again, I do thank you.
Thanks so much, Curt, for bringing those insights to us. I do have a few questions that came in via the chat. I want to go ahead and just run those down real quick for you.
Thank you.
First one is, how do we differentiate ourselves and help people find our information from among those billions and billions of stars?
Okay, yeah, that is certainly, I don't know that there's a perfect answer for that, but I think when I look at, you do have to have that personal touch with that on occasion. And I see social media more as that, in the sense that, well, as I mentioned, when we pull in new student athletes, in that I'm reaching out to them. Now that's a very small piece, but over time, there's a little detail. You just gradually start to build on that. Now one thing I didn't mention is that at JMU and schools and colleges, they have a natural growing market because they've got those generations of students that are coming through. So they're going to pick up as you go through. I think one way that you pull them in and get those stars is still by going back to the old traditional media and using them to cast a wide net to maybe capture some of those. It's still not a perfect method, but if you take the bell curve approach and what percentage of folks you might reach, you've got a chance of carving out a piece of that. It's not a perfect science, but it is a method.
Okay, thank you. Here's another one. How can the personal touch you referenced help business communicators reach employees and customers in a way that motivates action? Do you have an example of how that personal touch has helped you motivate other professionals or encourage fans to tune in or something along those lines?
Well, I think what's happened with that is, I'll give you a good example personally with Madison, for example. When we're doing live productions, we will try to, that's one of the nice things about online productions, and I don't know that this necessarily would pertain to the individual that asked that question, but we try to engage them within the format itself. One of the ideal situations where we do that is within a baseball game. We don't necessarily take calls, but we will take emails within the course of the game. We will have some discussion. Now, baseball is perfect because it gets very conversational, and there becomes that emotional connection there too. I think with I can't come up with anything specific with that, except that if there is a way, if you can identify, I guess, with your business, what the emotional attraction is and use that emotional attraction to get their attention, maybe that's enough to do it and to keep them engaged from there.
Okay. Here's another one that might be very timely. Do you have a communication plan to petition the AAC to include JMU in the league?
Well, I'm not at that senior leadership level here. As far as that is concerned, that sounds like a JMU alumnus. That's an interesting one there. I know, or I'm sure that our administration has been in contact with them. There are so many dynamics with that. It is a weighted equation. One thing that I've learned in administration and what have you, and making decisions, there are so many variables out there that sometimes we get focused ourselves on one that we personally like, and we don't worry about everything else around it. But when you're in a leadership role, you have to worry about the whole calculus equation. There has been, I'm sure, some communication. I'm sure the AAC is very much aware of James Madison University, but that's something for Mr. Bourne, Charlie King, and President Alger to concern themselves with. Thanks for the question.
Fair enough.
Yes.
Fair enough.
That wasn't you, was it, Greg?
That was not me, no.
Okay.
So, Amy, that's all the questions in the chat right now. Can you go ahead and open everyone's line so we can see if there's any live questions?
Everybody is unmuted.
Okay. Give everyone a second here to think about it if they want to.
We realize usually during the webinars, most of the questions come in via chat since everyone's at work and not always in a...
There are times when I'm on Matazone and I know people are tuned in and they're not chatty that day. They're not conversational. So, it's interesting. And I know those were very active on it at first and then gradually kind of just moved away from it just simply because it was a new method of communicating. But yeah, there's many that will just listen and learn that way too. They're observing.
All right, well, it looks like that's the case today. We don't have any live questions coming in. So with that, why don't we go ahead and just call it a day, wrap up the conversation. And Curt, thank you again for joining us today.
My pleasure.
I do want to share with everyone that our next monthly webinar will take place on August 7th. when Deb Heilman will share preparation and review hints for those taking the certification exams in advance of next month's regional conference. And then we'll return to our regular webinar schedule in October after the conference. Finally, we want to make sure you're aware of just a few things as we part company. Please complete the participant survey. It will open when you exit. If you have questions about the webinar or the IABC Heritage Region, please email them to communication@iabcheritage.com. You can connect with Curt directly at dudleycm@jmu.edu or search Curt Dudley on social media. To learn about IABC memberships, go to iabc.com/membership. Thank you again for joining us today and have a wonderful afternoon.